Have you ever wondered what it's like to sit in on a magazine editorial meeting? Well, this is your chance. You're listening to Salt Lake Speaks, a monthly podcast where our editors, writers, and staff dig deeper into stories, chat with newsmakers, and talk amongst ourselves about arts, culture, food, music, politics, or whatever else might strike our fancy. After all, we are Utah's biggest fans.
Hi, this is Mary Brown Maloof, executive editor of Salt Lake Magazine, and this is Salt Lake Speaks. Today we welcome Genevieve Atwood, one of the first women members of the famed Alta Club. We all know the Alta Club because we all drive by it all the time, and it's a beautiful downtown landmark. The Italian Renaissance building, was built in 1897. So we know the building, but most of us haven't been inside because it's a private club. Gentlemen's clubs were part of the landscape when the Alta Club was established. The Union Club in San Francisco was the model for the Alta Club. And note the gentlemen's club description. Those were very common. It wasn't until a century after the Alta Club's founding that the club allowed women to become members. The original 3 members were Didi Corradini, Annette Cummings, and Genevieve Atwood. Today on Salt Lake Speaks, we welcome, as I said, Genevieve Atwood. So before we get started, I know breaking the gender barrier at the Alta Club is a distinction, but you've accomplished lots of other things. Could you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure, Mary, and thanks for inviting me. I'm the former this and the former that. So former state geologist, former member of the legislature. Presently, I'm head of earth science education, chief education officer, and I teach teachers to go outside and recognize that earth science surrounds them, and it's just fascinating to get to know that.
Right,
so that's true. What I do. I'm compulsively interested in earth science.
Fantastic.
And a sense of place. And as I was thinking about your magazine and this series, I realized that Salt Lake Speaks and Salt Lake Magazine is all about a sense of place and how different people have different perceptions of place, including the Alta Club.
Yes, no, that's true. And one of our jobs, and I think one of media's jobs, is to connect all the different parts of a community so they recognize that there are many facets to the place that they live in and not just the little section of it that they tend to stay in.
Correct. So. I'm with the program. That's what we're about.
Good. And that's what we're about too. We're having so much fun, guys. We're on the same page. Okay, so what about the Alta Club? What's it for? What is its purpose?
Well, it is a different place for different people. I married into a family of long-term Utahns. They weren't Alta Club members and in fact had some concerns about the Alta Club. My father married into an old line Utah family, mining, and it happened to be Fisher beer, sparkle brewed to the altitude. They've got a new opening of it, okay?
We love that, and their beanies. The beer and the beanies.
That's so exciting. And you might even ask, what's the difference between the Fisher Brewery, where you go and get your beer, and the Alta Club? Because you might think they were the same, and they're not the same at all. So I think that my family loved the Alta Club. My grandfather was a member, his brother was a member, they'd both been presidents of it, and the Alta Club for them was the quote-unquote third place, meaning you've got your home and you've got your work, but where you go and you just hang out, if you're a guy and you don't want to be at work and you don't want to be at home, you go to the Alta Club. And back then you smoked cigars and you drank, and it was a fine time had by all. But it also was a place where there was a balance of the community with the LDS Church. And so the Alta Club, as you know, is just across the street from the LDS Church. Mm-hmm. And the Alta Club over time has been a part of sort of usually a constructive, sometimes a contrary voice of how Salt Lake City is going to be the city for whomever. In other words, when they did the downtown, I forget what it was called, the downtown, when all that, you know, all that development of not the city center, but before that, when the transportation went in and the tracks went in and all that was disruptive to many people. And the Alta Club was right there with the church saying this is important. And so the Alta Club really believes in Salt Lake City. And so does the LDS Church. It's one of the reasons that Salt Lake City is not like so many other cities that have a cratered downtown. And that was how I was brought up, is that the Alta Club had a purpose far beyond men escaping their wives and going drinking. It really was a place of community where, even as a child, I got to have dinner with bankers and attorneys and learn to cross my legs and be
ankle.
polite. No, I guess it was.
Yes.
I'd forgotten. You
Etiquette
see, it didn't
classes
stick
I had
very
to
well.
take. Right.
That's right. And it was wonderful to go there. And it was my family's third place.
Sure. Yeah. I know my family belonged to Country Club in Atlanta, and then after they moved to New York, Daddy was a member of the Union League, so we always went there for holiday dinners and things like that. And they were letting women in by the front door then too. Mm-hmm. But at first, the Alta Club was only for men, and women, there was a back door entrance, wasn't there, when they brought women
Yes and no, it
in?
actually was the front door. And many people,
that was the front door.
Imagery.
It's a carriage entrance, right?
Yeah, and so you think about how the Alta Club as a building evolved. It has its original front door on State Street, and that's the women's entrance. But it was considered the side entrance. It wasn't really the back entrance. And as folks who really were excluded from the club, meaning blacks and to some extent others, but not as exclusive as the Eastern clubs. So my dad came from the East, and he came from Eastern clubs. And one of the things he liked about the Alta Club, for example, was it did not discriminate against Jews, ever. Okay, and so from my dad's perspective, it was actually a more open-minded, rather than, but women were considered not members, although there was one woman, and I wish I knew more about her. Her name was Mary McCormick, and she was one of the sort of the angels and founders of the Alta Clubs. She always was a status, and I knew of her as a child because as far as I was concerned, my dad said she, we don't have women, but she's a member. I mean, basically she has the status of women. And in terms of when we walk through the front door, the Alta Club actually changed its attitude about who goes, whether they were going to enforce the side door when, among others, Norma Matheson worked on Scott and others saying, Scott, you got to do something about this, okay? If you become powerful like the governor, this must change. So some of the stories are folk history. So the story of Frances Farley being turned back from the Alta Club front entrance, turns out it was probably the University Club. And the story of this person being blackballed or not, it turns out that usually a sponsor would say, Mary, I don't think they're going to make it. Let's not post it, okay? So yes, there was discrimination, and yes, the side door is a huge issue because I don't know about you, but when I was back east, my first job, I had to stand out in the rain by the side entrance of the Cosmos Club, which is the distinguished club for scientists. And one of the people on the committee actually resigned for how they treated little old me when I was only 22 years old or whatever it was, 25, and they made me stand in the rain.
Inadvertent feminist.
That is an interesting way to say it. And being the first woman in the Alta Club, because I actually was the very first, and I did not realize the planning for that, because I thought, Peter Billings had my application the first day. He got the usual suspects to sign the thing, and I got in a month, or I think it was a month, might have been 2 months before they let in any of the other women. But it turns out that the men of the Alta Club had a strategy because some of them could not remain members as long, they just didn't feel they could. If they were going to be a judge, they couldn't be discriminating against women in a club. If they were going to be a politician, they weren't about to turn off all the women's members. And some of them just had women that were going nag, nag, nag. And then there was Karen Shepard, who in Network magazine just went nag, nag, nag. And no one can nag better than Karen Shepard. I'm sure she did when she was back at Congress. I know she did when she was in the Utah Senate. I used to literally run with her, and she could nag me to run faster, which is really like getting Napoleon to get into a canter. So
I don't want to go to Russia. No, go on.
So this year has been fascinating because it's the 30 years of women in the Alta Club as full members. And I really had not paid attention that it was particularly important. In fact, I'd been mildly annoyed that people really thought that was my significant contribution.
Of course
to
you
Utah.
were.
Because, I know these other things that I have done. But in retrospect, it has become, now when people say, I think I've heard of you. And I said, yeah, I was the first woman in the Alta Club. They say, yes.
Right.
And it's much more of a symbol, it's much more of a role model than I had any idea of. And so this has been the year of the woman at the Alta Club, 30 years in the Alta Club. Next year's 135-year anniversary of the Alta Club. And in that process, I've learned a lot about the history. And the thing that has impressed me most is it was a movement of the men within the Alta Club, as well as the pressures on the outside, and that the pressures economically on the outside were really what brought it about. And I kind of knew that. So the Utah Bar Association was no longer having its meetings there because Jan Graham said, don't. I won't come.
I can't come. I don't want to come. I will not go to a place. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the governor happened to be Governor Bangerter, and he didn't care that much about the Alta Club. And so many state agencies stopped meeting there. So that force of economically putting pressure on the dining facilities, that made a difference.
Money
And then the
talks,
third
always.
factor was just the bad press. And
Right.
that was Brian Barnard. And I forget, I think he was somehow associated with some kind of outlet, but he certainly had got enough press saying,
Oh, yes.
don't do this. It had a titillation because it had to do with the liquor license.
Right.
And so they were saying, and I was hearing it from my father's perspective, who was saying, just what is this all about? He would have been much happier if I'd have been the seventh member of the Alta Club. I mean, he just didn't see it. And you think about it, and this is a grandiose analog, which I can't decide whether I just shouldn't say it because it's so minor in comparison. But Rosa Parks was a person on the bus, and I got to be on the bus. And I think Rosa Parks, as an individual, is very interesting.
Yes.
And what she accomplished as a person was more than just being on the bus. But I'm really proud to be that person, and it turns out that Peter Billings was the champion. So
Right.
Peter Billings is an attorney, and his dad, I knew his dad, and his dad's best friend sort of taught me Sunday school and all the rest of that. And Peter actually ran my application through before any vote. In other words, he basically said, this is a good one. And I sort of refer to myself as Little Mary Sunshine. I mean, and even men after the vote came up to me and said, if we had to have women, I'm glad it was you.
And did you slap them?
No, I gave them the usual hug. I slapped a move on them. Of course I did. I have to be careful what you say that now.
I know.
But no, I think that idea of what is your third place and where are you comfortable. And the Alta Club wants to be its members' third place, which leads me to the other thing that I think is interesting is, can the Alta Club really be the club it wants to be if it doesn't have a very strong component of women?
Well, I was gonna ask about that. I mean, when I was looking this up last night, doing my homework about this, and of course, I was at the event at the Alta Club that celebrated you and the other early female members. But and I remember at the time, wait, 1987? That's so late.
It's before the Chamber of Commerce. It's before. Oh, I have to be careful who I say. No, was it the Chamber? Anyway, we were not the first wagon, but we were not the last wagon either.
No, it's just from.
But 1987, isn't it just amazing how different that is? I just read an obituary of someone I admire, and in the obituary it said, and she was the 79th female to be admitted to the Utah State Bar. And it was about that. I mean, I just said to myself, look at how far we've come, Mary.
Right.
It's good for us.
But do you think, good for us, I mean, and
we have a ways to go.
Of course, Utah is a conservative state and things happen later here than they do on the coast. I mean, I'm a food writer, so I just look at it in terms of what's on my plate where, right? And just that way, they're not, it's slow to embrace, it moves like a turtle, but I guess it gets there. The interesting thing, of course, the other thing I thought, after I thought 1987, was this is just a private club in Utah. What difference does it make? But especially this year, when the discussion about men and women has focused less on gender and more on the power differential between men and women, and that's where the real problem lies, and that's why there's been a lot of harassment, all those kinds of things are because men are in position of power. And the Alta Club was a seat of power in Salt Lake City, so admitting members to those ranks is significant. It's significant. I mean, it is Rosa Parks on the bus.
And I'm impressed by how particularly the younger women say this is the place that they have complete status with men. No one looks at a woman having lunch at the Alta Club with another member with, I wonder what that's about.
Right.
And it is a safe place for powerful women.
Do you think that Alta Club's changed since they started admitting women? Has it, I know it's still a third place, but is it, women have different concerns than men,
but
a lot. It's not, we're not, even the most professional of us aren't as totally focused on business usually. There's a lot of women sort of have, I'm making a ton of generalizations here that I'm going to get in trouble for.
I agree.
But there's maybe more social concerns, maybe more awareness of other problems in the city. I mean, has its mission expanded education-wise? I mean, it's not just for women to go smoke cigars and be away from their husbands.
I think poking around, that's a wonderful question. So the Alta Club has changed a lot. So Salt Lake City changed. So has the balance of power within Salt Lake City changed. When I was in the legislature, it was really a different place than it is now. Although the proportion, and I don't think you can talk about anything in Utah or Salt Lake City without thinking about the importance economically, socially, culturally of the LDS Church.
No, you cannot.
And therefore saying, how has the Alta Club changed with respect to women, I think is a broader question, is how's Utah changed, how's Salt Lake City changed? I think that the Alta Club, I like to think about the future of the Alta Club as well. So someone like Karen Shepard, who did Network Magazine, also founded something called the Utah Women's Forum. And that was for women who were lonely at the top, people who were head of agencies. And I was in that early, and we needed each other.
Sure.
And now that group probably has over 100 members, and it's much more social. And I mean, you wouldn't share the latest thing that went on in the office that you don't know how you're going to cope with 100 people, but you would have shared it with 8 people and had the reaction be, oh no, or just cool it.
Right.
I mean, things like, can you travel, if you're sending 4 people to look at a coal plant in Cameron, Wyoming, are you going to send them 3 and 1 because one of them's a woman, or could you do 2 and 2? At the end of that, you just say, cool it, okay? It's not a big deal. If someone does something else that's really over the top, you say, yeah, this. And I think that we now have many outlets for that, or at least I have, and I bet you do too.
Yes.
And I think even listening to podcasts, you're hearing people say, this is how you can do that. I don't think that the status of women at the Alta Club is what the Alta Club needs or what the status of women needs as well. There are powerful women in the Alta Club, but it is not where the powerful women see as their third place. I think that most of us, I still consider myself powerful, although I'm not as powerful as I used to be, have a place that we connect with the people that can make a difference in the realm we want to make a difference. And for me, that is not in the Alta Club.
Right.
But I do connect with men at the Alta Club who are the men I like to work with. And I've been a little surprised. So as I said, I married into a non-Alta Club family. And in fact, I've been told to say that my husband was not social, but bottom line is he was hostile. He really saw the Alta Club as a place that kept people out, rather than a place that allowed change to happen. And I can understand, I mean,
well, there is that about clubs.
There is
they're
about
by definition
any club.
Any club is about exclusion to some extent.
Absolutely.
It's about creating your own niche, right? And of course, in this day and age, everything is nichified, I always call it. We're all stay in our little piece of the pie, and it's easier because of the way media works, because of the internet, because the way TV works. We can all very much stay in our comfort zone as far as those things go, maybe easier than we used to. But officially, a club is about self-selection,
right.
A self-selected society.
And let's poke around on something. I taught geography of Utah up at the University of Utah. And as part of that, we did not only the physical, where I was out of control and fine, but we did the social as well. And one of the articles in Utah at the New Millennium said, Utah isn't segregated because there are so few minorities, we don't even qualify as segregated.
Right.
But let's use the isolation index. And I love that you've added this, because I have not thought of this today until, Mary, you poked around on this. Because for me, the Alta Club gets me out of my isolation. Right. And the isolation index, I'd have the students actually take the test of who do you spend Sunday with? And how many of people different than you do you run into so it's a wonderful one, and Utah is extraordinarily high on the isolation index nationally.
We're an island out here.
Well, and we're an island among ourselves.
Yes.
In other words, this idea of sort of tribalism, I call it. I think
right.
a niche is a rather sweet way of saying something that I worry about for our whole country. For me, the Alta Club actually is a way to broaden to get me out of my isolation index, because I can
right.
happily hang out with my university colleagues and it turned out for my students in the geography of Utah that it was the universities where they were most out of isolation. And I thought, what a great thing about our country to have the universities be a place where people are seeing people unlike them. And as far as I'm concerned, the Alta Club does that for me. I get to work with men, and I happen to like men. And so being on the board has just been plain old fun for me.
Right. Well, it is all fun if you're, and we all should be open to it, to encounter other mindsets, other cultures, other tribes, and think about how they relate to where your comfort zone.
And how can we get where we're going? Because I love Salt Lake. I know you do too. And I think that Salt Lake always has to be protected, expanded. I watch the center of gravity of our state has now moved by population and to some extent power to northern Utah County. And I say to myself, how do we keep Salt Lake City strong?
Right.
I think the Alta Club keeps Salt Lake City strong by its commitment to Salt Lake and its commitment to power.
That's great. This is great. And this is Alta Club's Year of the Woman, as it is this country's Year of the Woman in a lot of ways.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mary, for inviting me.
This was really fun.
It was
Thanks.
fun.
You've been listening to an episode of Salt Lake Speaks, a podcast from Salt Lake Magazine. Today we've been speaking with Genevieve Atwood, the first woman member of the Alta Club, about the role of women at the Alta Club and the Year of the Woman. You can find us at saltlakemagazine.com/podcast.